I will start. Good morning. Good morning, dear colleagues. I may invite you to take your seats. I now call the meeting of the General Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions to order. Colleagues, the agenda for this meeting has been distributed. I would like to suggest now one change in the order of this agenda of today, seeing that on item 3 of today's agenda, remarks on recent work of the Bureau of the General Committee related to the situation in Ukraine by the rapporteur, Mr. Hajidiani, seeing that the Russian version of this report is not yet available despite what we have communicated yesterday, I suggest that we postpone item 3 until after treatment of the 4 supplementary items, which means until our meeting of Sunday. Any objections? No? So decided. So please note item 3, report and questions to report of mission to Ukraine will be treated on Sunday. Any other remarks on agenda? No, so adopted. I also like to remind all of you that the election of our committee officers for the 29th annual session of the Assembly will take place during the committee's final session, which is likely to take place on Sunday morning. Nominations for candidates for election should be handed in to the table office no later than the start of that meeting. 11:30 a.m. on Sunday morning. This is important because it concerns election, which concerns all of us. Let me now pronounce a special welcome and introduction. It's a pleasure for me as chair of the Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions to welcome you all to this first meeting of our third committee. I would like to introduce and thank our rapporteur, Mr. Kyriakos Hajidiani from Cyprus. The committee is staffed by Deputy Secretary General Mr. Andreas Baker and by the clerk from the United Kingdom House of Lords, Mr. John Turner. We also have present Mr. Michael Georg Link, Vice President. Before we begin, can I ask anyone speaking from a prepared text to hand that text to the Secretariat in advance, please, for a big help to the interpreters. In this way, it will make our meeting productive and, of course, more efficient. The committee is scheduled to have 4 meetings during the session. We will first have the report and draft resolution prepared by our rapporteur, Mr. Hajidiani, on the theme of this year's annual session, Advancing Sustainable Development to Promote Security, the Role of Parliaments. 30 amendments, colleagues, have been tabled to the draft resolution. It means we will be working hard. In addition, this committee has been tasked by the Standing Committee to debate and consider 4 supplementary items covering the following issues. First, draft resolution on educating school children to avoid human trafficking, proposed by Mr. Smith from the United States of America. Second, draft resolution on neonatal care as a social development target, proposed by Ms. Taverna d'Italia. Third, draft resolution on combating xenophobia, aggressive nationalism and related intolerance, proposed by Mr. Turov from the Russian Federation. And fourth, draft resolution on a call for stronger OSCE action against increased discrimination of Christians in certain OSCE participating states, as well as adherents of other minority faiths, proposed by Mr. Söder from Sweden. 8 amendments have been proposed to these supplementary items. These supplementary items will be considered after we have finished our work on the report and draft resolution. Before moving on to the draft report and resolution, I would like to make some opening remarks on our recent work in the Bureau of the General Committee. Dear colleagues, in the 4 months since we met in Vienna, there have been numerous developments that have required the attention of myself and my colleagues, Michael and Kyriakos. The time is not here for me to give you a detailed report of all our work, but I would like to highlight some specific issues that we have engaged with. A great deal of our focus has been on the dramatic humanitarian situation in eastern Ukraine. A report on the work by Kyriakos and me has been made available to you, and Kyriakos will give a short presentation on this report in our meeting of Sunday. I will therefore not go into detail on Ukraine now, aside from urging all of you and all sides to the war in Ukraine to give continued attention and to end this human tragedy. Only 3 and some hours of plane from here, from Luxembourg. We need ceasefire and we need stopping of shooting, we need stopping of shelling, we need immediately stopping of causing victims by mines. Please, all sides, hear our voices here from Luxembourg, our call from our Committee on Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions. The only call is stop it and comply to the Minsk agreements, to which all sides that have signed Minsk agreements and added protocols have committed themselves repeatedly. We cannot go on tolerating any of what's happening every day: dead people, injured people, young and old, civilian and military. Stop it. Also, my colleagues have been in regular contact with our colleagues from Turkey. We wished to do a visit focused on the rights of parliamentarians with a number of prominent members of parliament imprisoned. I think it is vital that we can go into the prisons in Turkey. We have not received authorization to enter visits in prisons in Turkey. Please, Turkish delegation, come to us and strongly help us and support that we finally, after half a year of asking, get authorization to enter prisons in Turkey. As you would also expect, and me and my colleagues have continued to speak up in cases in which we see concerning trends in respect of human rights. For example, last month's detention of hundreds of peaceful protesters in Kazakhstan and the Russian Federation sparked us to focus on respect for the fundamental freedoms of assembly and expression. We urge all members of this committee to consider how fundamental freedoms, particularly of assembly and expression, are being applied and are protected in law in your own countries. Every country is concerned by developments that are going on in OSCE area. I may just remind of the very clear words spoken yesterday here in the afternoon by the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. His words were very clear, and I would like to keep referring to this speech. Who hasn't heard it here yesterday, please go and get that speech online. While communications and information are developing so rapidly, it is particularly crucial that we make sure our changing laws continue to respect the international principle OSCE and OSCPA has agreed to. Now, I will move to give the floor to our rapporteur, Kyriakos Hatzidiani, who has worked very hard to present a good draft report and resolution as a basis for our work. Mr. Hatzidiani, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, dear Michael, dear Andreas Baker, I would like to thank for the cooperation and for the work all this time, the whole year. It was a long process to get the assessment and to be today here, all of us, and to have a text in front of us ready to take a decision on it. My main aim when drafting this year's report and draft resolution was to reaffirm our commitments towards the principles of the Helsinki Final Act and to update them so that they continue to be relevant in light of developments brought about by a number of factors, such as digital technology and climate change. Concerning the link between security and sustainable development, as provided by this year's theme, the OSCE has highlighted it from the outset. Its comprehensive approach to security rests on the recognition that conflicts may arise not only from political and military threats, but also from economic tensions, environmental degradation, social insecurity, and violations of individuals' rights. These factors must also be addressed for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Inversely, sustainable development is a prerequisite for the advancement of peace, stability, prosperity, democracy, fundamental freedoms, and human rights protections. In this regard, as I responded to the theme of this year's annual session, I tried to provide some practical ways through which national parliaments can contribute in advancing human rights protection, particularly using parliamentary diplomacy and parliamentary scrutiny. Taking a look at the human rights situation across the OSCE areas, we must admit that we are witnessing a regression in human rights protection. We are witnessing genocides, war crimes, and crimes against humanity today in this time. We see grave violation of human rights, including torture, extrajudicial killings, and detentions without trial. If we try to find the underlying reasons for this regression in the protection of human rights, we can see that the diminishing weight of human rights protection in the foreign policy of participating states plays a significant role. This growing weakening of international oversight of democratic and rule of law standards is exploited by countries with oppressive leaders. This is further exacerbated as mechanisms of international judicial protection are also being further questioned. Looking deeper into the reason for regression in human rights protection, we see that authoritarianism plays a negative role. Nationalism and xenophobia that are developing particularly in countries of first reception of migrants and asylum seekers are a step backwards from the standards of international protection of human rights as developed over the past years. We continue to see the demonization of minorities by authoritarian leaders, anti-Semitism, as well as neo-Nazis. Another worrisome aspect of the goal in human rights protection in the OSCE area has been the long-term effects of the declaration of state of emergency. In this regard, the role of international organizations in cases where the declaration of a state of emergency is imminent is decisive. Another objective, which I consider very significant for safeguarding human rights, is genocide prevention. Genocide is a war crime. 70 years after the adoption of the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, its goals remain a key challenge. Remembrance of genocides is necessary so as to cultivate awareness and prevent the repetition of such horrific crimes. Additionally, in my report and draft resolution, I touch upon the issue of the death penalty. Death penalty has been widely recognized as a cruel, inhuman, and degrading punishment. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly should defend the right to life, they stand firmly against all forms of capital punishment. One of my main concerns are the consequences of human rights violation on children. Children living in conflict zones around the world continue to suffer extreme violence and serious human rights violations. Children became victims in accidents caused by explosive remnants of war. We have seen this in our visit, in our mission in Ukraine. Displacement of children all too often results in separation from their parents, obstruction to their access to health care, education, clean water, and sanitation have also resurfaced as a threat in the OSCE region. Furthermore, the particular needs of stateless children are also examined, as well as the pressing issues of child labor, forced marriages, coercive military recruitment of children, and their use in armed conflicts. Other issues highlighted in my report and draft resolution include the eradication of modern types of slavery, human trafficking, sexual exploitation, as well as economic exploitation. Refugees flee war areas and usually having an illegal resident status, face health problems, discrimination and persecution. Ensuring refugees and asylum seekers basic human rights to health and their access to national health systems constitutes the best strategy in terms of saving lives, minimizing the cost of care, and protecting the local population. Furthermore, a number of issues arise with regard to ISIS militants who are citizens of participating states. The practice of recalling their citizenships must stop. They must be brought to justice, ensuring a fair trial. Freedom of the media and the several challenges this fundamental freedom face are also given particular prominence in my report. as journalists suffer great repression with an increased number of them being killed, imprisoned, or abducted. Totalitarian regimes, corruption, drug trafficking, and other ill phenomena are in open war with independent, particularly investigative journalists. Following the work of the OSCE at the governmental level, I also included special reference to women who are victims of inequality and harassments, both during peace and in conflict regions. Regrettably, the goal of ending violence against women is still very remote, as anti-gender rhetoric continued also last year. Furthermore, the report and the draft resolution deal with a number of issues connected to conflicts within the borders of the OSCE. In Ukraine, Transnistria, in the occupied areas of Georgia and Nagorno-Karabakh, people continue to suffer serious human rights abuses. Refugees, internally displaced persons, and enclaved persons face a host of restrictions to their most basic human rights, including access to and use of property, education and health care, freedom of expression, and religious freedom. OSCE participating states must ensure that human rights commitments are upheld both during armed conflict and in areas under occupation. Upholding human dignity must lie at the heart of our activity. As long as there is international cooperation, peace stands a chance and people suffer less. In this year, in 2019, must be, and we have to make it, a better year for the human rights. A number of amendments have been submitted. Thank you very much from all of you. Most of them I consider to be friendly. Thank you for your interest in enhancing human rights protection in our common space, the OSCE area, and again, thank you everybody for your support for this report and resolution.
Thank you very much to our rapporteur, Mr. Hadi Chani, for this oral presentation of the draft report. We now move on to the debate on the draft resolution, and it would assist us greatly if any member wishing to speak during the debate could enter her or his name in the register as early as possible now. By now, we already have 24 speakers on our list. Therefore, we will give a time limit of 3 minutes per speech in the debate. Yes, 3 minutes. I think we hope to go through on 3 minutes. 3 minutes in the general debate. When we will move on to the amendments, I will ask speakers to observe a time limit of 1 minute, so you can get ready for that. It's my pleasure now to open the floor for debate. And as a first speaker, I have Mr. Dobre from Romania. After him will be Ms. Pozio from Sweden. Mr. Dobre, you have the floor.
Dear Margaret, ladies and gentlemen, we have a new valuable report along with a timely draft resolution provided by our dear colleagues and rapporteur, Mr. Kyriakos Hadjiani. I would not analyze it, but I would make few short points of two very topical aspects with a tremendous role in paving our way towards sustainable development and security, the general theme of our annual session. Firstly, on the human dimension in the frame of our governmental organization, the OSCE. As to the current complex situation of human dimension, we believe it is of utmost importance to spend all efforts in order to reach a consensual decision on the organization of a human dimension implementation meeting this year as soon as possible. My country, Romania, will continue to strongly support ODIHR's activity. We believe its standard setting and election monitoring activities are of utmost importance to the development of democratic institutions and human rights in all OSCE participating states, and it is especially important for the protection of fundamental rights in time of crisis. Secondly, we have to pay much more attention to the increasing extremism, and in this respect, to put high the combating of hate speech and anti-Semitism and all other forms of discrimination. The world we live in today is deeply challenged by a surge of populism and hate speech that builds on fear and emotion. Building peaceful and safe societies should be based on open and inclusive policies reflecting the richness of our societies. One of the most effective means to combat hate speech is through reaching out to young generations by education and by continuously reaffirming democratic values. In this respect, parliaments hold an important role as they can promote both education and effective measures, as well as building of appropriate narratives in political discourse. The current Romanian EU Council presidency, within its four pillars, the Europe of common values, has dedicated a particular attention to themes such as combating of racism, intolerance, xenophobia, populism, anti-Semitism, and hate speech. Two high-level events dedicated to the combating of anti-Semitism have been organized so far in Brussels and in Bucharest. I am inviting you all, my dear parliamentary colleagues, to make use of parliamentary diplomacy and other specific tools in order to support your government on this aspect. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ms. Posio from Sweden, is getting ready. Ms. Muradova from Azerbaijan. Please, Ms. Posio.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start by thanking Mr. Hadiani for a good draft resolution. In particular, it is good that the vulnerability of national minorities, women, LGBTQI people, and journalists are noted, and that they must be addressed. Supporting the work against abuse of women and girls, discrimination, hate crime, anti-Semitism, and other intolerance is important, and it is good that it is written in the draft. I especially want to emphasize the importance of education in schools when it comes to awareness that racism and discrimination may lead to the worst examples of genocide. However, I am surprised that the draft is lacking the importance of working with sexual and reproductive health and rights. As well as we need to teach what intolerance leads to, we must raise the awareness about everyone's right to good sexual and reproductive health and rights. Nationalism and patriarchy, with its negative outlook on what is considered to be different, also has an old-fashioned view on women who apparently only are useful for childbirth and to care for homes and families. It is sometimes difficult to change old people's way of thinking, but through education, we have every opportunity to make our children and young people understand the value of a democratic society where everyone has equal value and everyone's human rights are ensured. I submitted my amendment on the importance of SRHR in education as a tool to come to terms with discrimination and violence against women and LGBTQI people. Sexual and reproductive health and rights are human rights and should have an obvious place in this resolution, especially now when we see that more and more countries are turning their backs on SRHR, when we see how women are being denied to the rights to safe abortions, when we see how women and girls in conflict and war are subjected to serious gender-based violence. It is not enough to collect data and strengthen the laws on rape and child marriage. We have to use all possible tools we have to ensure that all people have their rights met, and that, my fellow parliamentarians, includes women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, by now we have 28 speakers on the list. If they all use 3 minutes, it will bring us over the time allowed to the session today. I therefore suggest to close the speakers list. We close it. The speakers list is by now closed. And if you can be a little shorter than the 3 minutes, it's very good to get this finished by 12:30. Уважаемая госпожа Muradova from Azerbaijan, you have the floor.
Спасибо, уважаемый председатель. Уважаемый господин Хаджиянис, позвольте поблагодарить вас за всесторонний доклад, в котором вы хорошо поработали над тем, чтобы отобразить реальную картину нарушения прав человека, исходящую из различного рода конфликтов. Мы разделяем ваш взгляд на то, что пострадавшие и затронутые от конфликтов лица сталкиваются с ограничением большинства их основных прав человека, включая доступ к собственности и ее использование. Мы не должны забывать, что никакое право не может быть осуществлено за счет нарушения прав других. Лица, которые жили в зоне конфликта, имеют равные права с теми, кто все еще проживает там. Следовательно, представители азербайджанской общины, изгнанные из Нагорно-Карабахского региона и 7 прилегающих районов Азербайджана, имеют те же права, что и проживающие там ныне армяне. Это не первый случай, когда представители Армении на разных площадках пытаются прикрыть свою агрессию и оккупацию почти 1/5 территории Азербайджана якобы защитой прав проживающих там граждан Азербайджана армянской национальности. Хорошо известно, что Армения использовала военную силу для оккупации территории Азербайджана и создания на ней подчиненного сепаратистского образования. Эта сущность совершенно не признается как таковая. Она находится под руководством и контролем Армении, которая пытается преподнести ее как сторону конфликта с привлечением к переговорному процессу. Это прозвучало здесь вчера и сегодня, как, к сожалению, неконструктивный ответ на наш, основанный на принципах международного права подход. Армения делает все возможное, чтобы представить армянскую общину региона в качестве единственного представителя, при этом отказываясь принять хотя бы существование азербайджанской общины, насильно изгнанной из этого региона Азербайджана. Напомню, что Совет Безопасности ООН в своих резолюциях осудил применение силы против Азербайджана. И никто никоим образом не может принизить значимость резолюции Совета Безопасности, потому что в соответствии со статьей 25 Устава ООН решения Совета Безопасности должны исполняться странами-членами ООН. Поэтому заявление о том, что эти резолюции в отношении конфликта армяно-азербайджанского потеряли свою актуальность, сегодня безосновательны. Хотя Армения все эти годы боролась лишь за захват чужой территории, тем не менее, давайте поговорим о людях, о тех, которые в результате вооруженных столкновений по линии соприкосновения все еще страдают от конфликта, разрушаются семьи, моральные ценности, семейные традиции. Дети войны, теряя самые лучшие годы своей жизни, становятся агрессивными, или же чувство страха преследует их везде и повсюду. Ведь они должны расти в кругу семьи, иметь доступ к здравоохранению, образованию, чистой воде и санитарным услугам, как это предусмотрено одним из важных пунктов ЦУРа. Затяжные конфликты лишают их этой возможности и делают их заложниками амбиций политиков стран, которые не пренебрегают принципам международного права. Мы не можем принимать продолжающееся вопиющее пренебрежение к международному гуманитарному праву и правам человека, как будто это норма жизни. Поэтому мы путем принятия нашего документа и отражения в нем усиливающих поправок, которые должны еще четче отразить наше уважение к правам человека и основным свободам, призвать к ответственности каждого, кто своими действиями способствует нарушению мира и стабильности. Спасибо за внимание.
Спасибо. The floor goes to Mr. Mercer from Canada, while Mr. Cohen from United States is getting ready.
Thank you, Chair. I congratulate the rapporteur for the General Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions for including a focus on youth and their role in the future peace and security of our countries and in the world. Canada is a signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and 2 optional protocols criminalizing trafficking in youth and prohibiting the involvement of youth in armed hostilities. Canada has supported international efforts to protect not only Canadian children, but children everywhere. As chair of the Special Senate Committee on Nonprofit and Charitable Organizations in the Canadian Parliament, I welcomed youth representatives from long-standing civil society organizations and youth who are inventing new ways to make their contribution to the economic and social health of their communities, their country, and even internationally. These active youth are creating opportunities for other youth to participate in decision-making and strengthening their communities. As the minister responsible for youth, the Prime Minister of Canada hosted a National Youth Summit in June, following months of soliciting advice from young Canadians on what they needed to be strong contributing citizens. The introduction of the resulting youth policy notes, and I quote, involving young people in the political process will help build trust in democratic institutions, in turn protecting Canada's democracy, end quote. One of the priorities identified by youth for the youth policy is the opportunity to develop their leadership skills, equipping them with larger leadership roles into the future. Similar initiatives in the OSCE countries will help the next generation use venues like this one to seek mutual understanding and cooperation. A particular effort is being made in Canada to meet the distinct needs of Indigenous youth, which is essential for the important work of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in our country. Indigenous youth are the fastest growing segment of the Canadian population and are among the most vulnerable. Their voices are being heard in the creation of and implementation of Canada's youth policy, which directs departments and agencies to establish opportunities for youth participation in advisory and working groups or through more formal consultation. We have learned in Canada how important it is to listen to our youth in order to ensure that their rights are protected, and not only those with access to power, but also our most vulnerable. I welcome the opportunity to discuss what other countries are doing with you, my fellow delegates. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The floor now goes to Mr. Cohen from United States, while Mr. Konyoryan from Armenia is getting ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to appreciate the rapporteur for his report. I concur with his remarks, and I thank him for making them so saliently. I am concerned, as I've traveled through Europe in the last few months, of the rise of anti-Semitism that has been prevalent, and I've noticed in Hungary, where I was in the synagogue, the Great Synagogue, and heard from leaders of the Jewish Federation and the rabbi there about increased anti-Semitism fervor there, and heard it in France, where I traveled with Jewish people who told me about people having to move for their own security and protection. That is a scary thought. It's only been 75 to 80 years ago that the Nazis tried to exterminate the Jews in the Holocaust. What occurred there was the use of nationalism, xenophobia, hate speech, and attacks on Jews, Roma, and others, and I quote others because there were lots of them, to create an atmosphere for authoritarian rule and a Holocaust unknown to this world. It is in danger of being repeated. I urge every member here to try to go back to their own parliaments and encourage their parliamentarians and their governments to stand up strongly against this rise of authoritarianism, these attacks on the press that limit the opportunity to expose what's going on in authoritarian regimes where the rule of law is under attack because it's the rule of man that's important. And the rule of man says, my friends and my oligarch buddies get the money, get the power, and it's not about the country and the people, and it's not about progress, it's not about democracy. Just yesterday, my country, the United States of America, celebrated the Declaration of Independence, 1776, that all men are created with certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are American values, but they're also values of the OSCE. They're about being against the death penalty, being for people having the opportunity to have choice, as the delegate from Sweden emphasized, women's rights, children's rights, human rights. And I urge you all to go back and think about the prospects of change in your countries or encouragement for better policies in your countries to stand up for freedom of the press, against authoritarianism, against anti-Semitism, against all forms of discrimination and prejudice that are against the rules of God and the rules of man and the betterment of mankind. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The floor will now go to Mr. Konyoryan while Mr. Buser from Sweden is getting ready. Уважаемый господин Konyoryan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, I want to thank distinguished reporter for his report and resolution. And I agree with the assessment of reporter that freedom of expression is not merely one of the fundamental freedom. It is cornerstone of democratic society, and violation of freedom of expression and freedom of media should be viewed as a sign of overall weakening of democratic institutions, rule of law, and human rights in given country. We are alarmed at increasing violence against and persecution of journalists, particularly those investigating cases of corruption of high-level officials and other sensitive topics. Tragic death of Ms. Daphne Caruana Galizia is indicative of this alarming situation. Family members of journalists are also targeted by the authorities in certain OSCE participating states and used to blackmail and restrain their investigative activities. Parliamentary Assembly should call on the OSCE participating states to protect safety of journalists, fully implement their commitments on upholding freedom of expression and freedom of media, and cooperate in regard with the OSCE representative on the freedom of media. The adoption of OSCE Ministerial Council decision of safety of journalists set an important framework to protect journalists, especially those engaged in dangerous professional missions, including in conflict situations. We are pleased to note that the reporter has put an emphasis on the topic of protection of cultural heritage. Protection of cultural heritage, both in terms of peace and times of peace and war, is a priority for Armenia. We believe that protection of cultural heritage goes hand in hand with ensuring social and cultural rights of people. Full upholding of inalienable cultural rights of people, as set in the UN Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, is necessary prerequisite for protection of cultural heritage and combating its trafficking. We encourage the Parliamentary Assembly to pay special attention to protection of cultural heritage of those communities who no longer use them or no longer exist in particular region. We commend focus in the report on genocide prevention. Genocide remembrance and education constitute an important part of the OSCE Human Dimension commitments. At the 25th meeting of the OSCE Ministerial Council in Milan, upon initiative of Armenia and Cyprus, 42 OSCE participating states adopted a statement on 17th anniversary of the Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Armenia stands at the forefront of international efforts to promote genocide prevention, education, and remembrance at different international fora. The adoption of the GA resolution designating the 9th of December as an International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of Crime of Genocide and the prevention of the crime in 2015 was a landmark achievement in this regard. We believe the OSCE-PA should add its voice of support to the efforts of the international community aimed at prevention and countering identity-based hate crimes, including the crime of genocide. The draft resolution of the Third Committee fully serves this purpose and delivers an important political message against hate crimes and their ultimate form, the crime of genocide. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The floor now goes to Mr. Buser from Sweden is getting ready. Mr. Khubarov from Ukraine. Mr. Buser from Sweden, you have the floor.
Thank you. Madam Chair, dear colleagues, I would start by expressing my gratitude for the draft resolution by Mr. Hajiani. During my lifetime, for the past 30 years, many improvements for LGBTI persons, both socially in daily life, but also, and most importantly, in legislative rights have taken place within the countries of the OSCE region. Even though improvements have taken place in many countries, we still see many challenges for the future when it comes to LGBTI rights. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people around the world face discrimination, persecution, and violence simply for expressing who they are and whom they choose to love. Consensual same-sex conduct is criminalized in more than 70 countries, with punishment including fines and imprisonment, and even in some countries, death penalty. LGBTI people are targets for torture or ill treatment by the governments, not only for their political beliefs or activism, but also for their identity. And dear colleagues, to be honest, I'm worried about the worsening situation for LGBTI persons also in the OSCE region, and would therefore like to stress the importance for the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly to fully support the rights of LGBTI persons. And I would like to stress amendment number 3 that will come up later, written by Mr. Jasenko Manovic from Sweden, who unfortunately didn't have the chance to come to this assembly this time, but he's genuinely engaged in these issues as well, and as the same as for the Swedish delegation. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor now goes to Mr. Khubarov from Ukraine, while Mr. Cardin, United States, is getting ready.
Уважаемая госпожа председатель, уважаемые коллеги, разумеется, я также благодарю докладчика господина Хаджияни за подготовленный им доклад. К сожалению, нельзя не согласиться с одним из выводов докладчика о том, что мы являемся свидетелями регресса в деле защиты прав человека. Но нельзя не заметить и осторожный оптимизм автора доклада, который на вопрос, а можем ли мы все еще надеяться, что существующая система защиты прав человека способна выжить и спасти человечество от скатывания в пропасть, отвечает: да, если нам удастся сохранить наши принципы и привлечь к ответственности тех, кто нарушает свои обязательства. Для меня тут ключевыми являются слова «и привлечь к ответственности тех, кто нарушает свои обязательства». Но, увы, вместо применения эффективных методов искоренения регрессивных явлений мы ограничиваемся снова исключительно заклинаниями, которые лишь поощряют тех, кто нарушает международное право, тех, кто совершает агрессию против своих соседей. Судите сами. Разве Российская Федерация посмела бы вторгнуться в 2014 году на территорию Украины с последующей попыткой аннексии Крыма, если бы в 2008 году подверглась бы абсолютной обструкции, изоляции и санкциям за агрессию против Грузии и оккупации части ее территории? Ответ же очевиден для всех. Нет, этого не случилось бы, но урок не усвоен. Я категорически возражаю против того, что в докладе не указывается критическая ситуация в оккупированном Российской Федерацией Крыму. Для докладчика как будто бы не существует украинского Крыма, соответственно, в докладе не упоминаются ни сотни политзаключенных Крыма, ни насильственное похищение и убийство молодых людей, ни целенаправленное преследование коренного народа Крыма, крымских татар, ни игнорирование России решения Международного суда ООН об отмене запрета на деятельность Меджлиса крымско-татарского народа. В докладе нет ни одного слова о целенаправленном разрушении российскими оккупантами исторического и культурного наследия коренного народа Крыма, в частности, уничтожения под видом реставрации Бахчисарайского ханского дворца. Уважаемые коллеги, я настойчиво продолжаю призывать сейчас и впредь это буду делать, сопровождать принимаемые нами резолюции четкими указаниями на механизмы, что должны обеспечить их безусловное выполнение всеми государствами, членами организации. В случае же игнорирования членами организации принципов Хельсинского заключительного акта, как это происходит с Российской Федерацией, предусматривать меры принуждения их выполнять собственные обязательства. Благодарю за внимание.
Спасибо. The floor now goes to Mr. Cardin from United States of America. Is getting ready Mr. Senger Salan from Hungary.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let me congratulate the rapporteur on his report and draft resolution. I'm going to speak to one aspect of the report and resolution dealing with media freedom. It's interesting that yesterday in the plenary we adopted two supplementary resolutions that I think are very relevant to media freedom, and that is protecting the civil societies and their participation in our community and combating corruption. Both are critically important to media freedom. The report talks about the persecution of journalists and activists, which is consistent with decision number 3 at the recent ministerial meeting in Milan. The report spells out specifically the tragic and horrific death of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who was a U.S. resident. I have joined with other parliamentarians to hold those responsible for the Khashoggi death fully accountable for their actions, including the imposition of Magnitsky sanctions. The rapporteur talks about 80 deaths in total that have occurred. I would like to point out 5 occurred in my state, in Maryland. 5 journalists were killed a year ago defending freedom of the press. So this is an issue that affects every one of our states, the safety of journalists. I've introduced bipartisan legislation to establish a memorial to fallen journalists in the National Mall in Washington, D.C. The protection of journalists extends beyond violence to other ways that government and non-state actors use to intimidate or silence media, such as incarceration, lawsuits, and threatening language, much of which targets women journalists. All these constitute actions which seeks to muzzle a free and unfettered press and cannot be tolerated. The rapporteur report points out the imprisonment of journalists, citing Turkey as an example of a country that is doing injustice to journalists. It talks about repression of journalists, citing Hungary. Prior to coming to Luxembourg, I had the opportunity with part of our delegation to visit Budapest, and we met with journalists where the government has effectively tried to silence their voice as an independent media and diverse media within that country. That needs to change. We also take this moment to commend the Office of the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media and the critical work it does to shine light on cases of abuse, intimidation, and assault of the media. That's spelled out very well in the report, and again, I applaud the rapporteur for that. Madam Chair, let us speak with a united and strong voice against any government interference with a free media.
Thank you. The floor goes to Mr. Senger Salan from Hungary. Is getting ready Mr. Herashenko from Ukraine.
Thank you for floor, Madam. First of all, I have to reagate to Congressman Cohen's words about the anti-Semitism in Hungary. He painted a very black picture, but 3 days ago we sit together with the congressman and the whole American delegation in Budapest, together with their ambassador, Mr. Kornstein, who is the American ambassador to Hungary, and he is a Jewish man. And he said that nowadays in Europe, the safest and best place for a Jewish people to live is Budapest. But back to the report. In the report on the page 7, in the last paragraph, there is a reference to Hungary regarding the freedom of press. We reject the unfounded accusation and we ask to cancel the name of Hungary from the report. As a justification for the deletion of the reference to the freedom of the press in Hungary, we recommend studying the statistic of the Council of Europe platform for the safety of journalists and the protection of journalism, which was developed with the help of NGOs. As far as we know, no alert have been received concerning Hungary this year and in 2018. A total of 3 complaints were registered and there was a government response to each of them. The data in the platform shows that the conditions that threaten the physical security of journalists, means arrest or murder, unlike in other participating states, do not exist, and thus the naming and blaming of Hungary in such a context is seriously misleading. The Hungarian government is committed to promote and protect the freedom of pluralism of the media, as well as to grant equal access to media contents for everyone. The fundamental law stipulates that everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression and that Hungary recognized and protect the freedom. So I please the rapporteur to delete the name of Hungary from the report. Otherwise, I'm afraid we will not be in a position to vote in favor of the Luxembourg Declaration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The floor now goes to Mr. Herashenko from Ukraine, while Mr. Harris from United States gets ready.
Спасибо, уважаемая госпожа председательствующая. Российская Федерация продолжает грубо и брутально нарушать Хельсинкский заключительный акт о мире и безопасности в Европе. Уже более 5 лет продолжается оккупация украинского Крыма. Более 5 лет продолжается оккупация части украинского Донбасса. А мы продолжаем стыдливо не замечать этот факт и стараться не называть Россию государством-агрессором. Госпожа председатель Кеннер Неллен говорила в своем выступлении о необходимости выполнения Минских соглашений. Украина последовательно придерживается линии на исполнение Минских соглашений. Но мы не можем их выполнять в одностороннем порядке, в то время как Российская Федерация продолжает прямую военную, финансовую, информационную поддержку пророссийских сепаратистов на территории украинского Донбасса. Каждый месяц там гибнет десятки людей. Например, на прошлой неделе вооруженные формирования, снабженные российским оружием, расстреляли с противотанковыми ракетами машину Красного Креста с украинскими медиками, которые эвакуировали с передовой раненого бойца. Погибла женщина-врач Ирина Шевченко и водитель санитарного автомобиля Сергей Майборода. За каждым из них это судьбы людей. Я относительно самого текста доклада могу сказать, что мне жаль, что там нет ни слова о трагедии малазийского Боинга MH17. который был сбит в ходе действий российских террористических группировок, которым было передано страшное оружие, ракетный комплекс «Бук». В ходе этого террористического акта погибло 298 граждан разных стран, в том числе более 200 жителей Европы. И считаю, что мы должны в каждом нашем заседании помнить о том, что пока эта трагедия не будет наказана, и лица, которые привели к ее совершению, не будут привлечены к ответственности, у нас не будет безопасного неба над Европой. Также хотел бы сказать, что доклад называется «О содействии устойчивому развитию в интересах укрепления безопасности. Роль парламентов». Российская Государственная Дума не принимает участие в вопросах выработки стратегии безопасности российского государства. Российская Государственная Дума молча одобряет все инициативы диктатора Путина. Вы знаете, я недавно смотрел его интервью в Financial Times полуторачасовое перед саммитом в Осаке. Так он там даже за 1,5 часа ни разу ни слова не сказал о роли Государственной Думы и депутатов в вопросах обеспечения безопасности и внешней политики в Европе. Я призываю российскую делегацию в Государственной Думе активно участвовать и смело заявлять о том, что то, что делается Российской Федерацией по оккупации Крыма и Донбасса, это неправильно, это угрожает интересам всей Европы и Российской Федерации в том числе.
Спасибо. The floor now goes to Mr. Harris from the United States, while Ms. Samsonyan from Armenia is getting ready.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the rapporteur for a thorough report. I also want to comment on the media freedom section of page 7 of the report, following up on our colleague from Hungary. We obviously should never condone government-sanctioned violence, persecution, or imprisonment of journalists, as these are clear violation of Final Act principles. But I would urge more caution when naming OSCE specific member countries as violating these principles, when those naming decisions might seem arbitrary, since we should always strive to come as close to consensus as possible. In this case, as has been pointed out, one nation was named for, quote, great repression of the press. I assume in part based on the evaluation by Reporters Without Borders, yet 12 other OSCE members are ranked lower. And the score of the U.S. itself actually worsened to a greater extent than the named country. I urge consideration of modifying the final report with this in mind. Finally, I also urge discussion in future reports of the growing effects of digital social media on limiting access of our citizens to accurate news. Thank you.
Thank you. I now pass the floor to Ms. Samsonyan from Armenia. Is getting ready Mr. Scott from United States.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I would like to make a link between sport, human rights, and intolerance. The negative stereotypes, hate speech, statements demonstrating intolerance are not only circulating in the majority of Azerbaijani mass media, but also encouraged at the highest political level. State-led propaganda of hatred towards Armenia and Armenians creates conducive ground for hate crimes against Armenians. This is one of the main reasons why in most cases Armenian sportsmen don't participate in the championships held in Azerbaijan. Despite the recognition by the United Nations General Assembly of the contribution of sport to the realization of peace through the promotion of tolerance, mutual understanding, and peace, the Azerbaijani side has been systematically abusing sporting events by disseminating hatred towards Armenian sports teams and athletes during their visit to Azerbaijan. The acts of discrimination and hatred are manifested even towards those athletes who are of Armenian origin but have changed their nationality. A Russian wrestler of Armenian heritage, for instance, was booed during his wrestling final. The wrestlers and boxers who attended championships held in Baku in 2007 and 2011 respectively had unpleasant experiences with hostile crowds throwing rocks. Despite the assurances of security guarantees by Azerbaijan for the Armenian athletes during Baku hosted World Boxing Championship, the members of the Armenian team were attacked. When an Armenian boxer took the ring, a group of activists from the so-called the Karabakh Liberation Organization attacked the Armenian boxers, throwing stones against them. The club Kapaz had invited Armenian football players for an audition. However, it was reported they had no prior knowledge for the Armenian origin of the Russian players. Their arrival drew great uproar at the airport of Ganja. The officers of the State Border Service returned the Armenian football players who held Russian passports on the same plane in which they had arrived. In 2019, Henrik Mkhitaryan, playing for Premier League club Arsenal and captaining the Armenian national team, did not travel with his team for UEFA Europe League final against Chelsea, aimed concerns for his safety in Azerbaijan's capital, Baku. Arsenal said the club had not received acceptable guarantees from UEFA, the governing body of European football, that it would be safe for the footballer to travel. Although Azerbaijan said it had done everything to protect the security of the Armenian footballer, the toleration of racist targeting of Armenians in the Azerbaijani public and the media that manifest security risk have made it impossible for Mkhitaryan to travel to Baku. Ahead of the match, it was reported in the media that the fans of Mkhitaryan wearing shirts with his name were stopped in the street by the police to check if they had the name of Mkhitaryan on the backs of their shirts before being allowed to continue their way. Dear colleague, Armenia underlines the significance of the concept of the sport free for racism. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The floor now goes to Mr. Scott from United States. Is getting ready Ms. Karapetyan from Armenia.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Throughout the course of history, America has fought for freedom in Europe and around the world because America stands for freedom. That's just who we are. That's who we all are in this room today. The world has changed because of all of our efforts, and yet there's still corners of the world where the fight for freedom continues. Venezuela is one of those places. I traveled to the Venezuelan border with Colombia recently. I saw the death, hunger, and poverty up close. There were Venezuelan children walking for hours each way to go to school in Cucuta, just across the borders. Mothers and their young children trudged through dense forest across rivers to get to their only meal of the day. It was heartbreaking. This is a defining human rights issue of our time. Nicolas Maduro is starving his own people. Innocent people are dying. In the last 2 weeks, Maduro has tortured and killed a Navy captain accused of treason and blinded a 16-year-old boy at a protest. A UN report accuses Maduro's security forces of mass killings and cover-ups. The United States is taking action to try to force Maduro's side. We've sanctioned more than 100 persons and business entities in Venezuela in an effort to cut off funds to the Maduro regime. But the fight isn't over, and I'm calling on every country here to join us. We need Europe if we have any chance of bringing freedom to the Venezuelan people. I'm thankful the resolution being considered here today recognizes the importance of democracy and urge European nations to hold the Maduro regime accountable and punish the brutal genocide that's happening there, because that is exactly what it is. It is genocide. The fight for freedom and democracy isn't without cost, but it's a cost worth paying. Every European country should join with the United States and recognize Juan Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela. Every European country should impose significant sanctions on Venezuela and the Maduro regime. Every European country should immediately stop doing business with Cuba and the Cuban regime, which is propping up Maduro in his genocide. And every European country should demand that Maduro leave power to allow for free, fair, and democratic elections. Right now, Cuba, China, Russia, and Iran are active participants in Maduro's genocide. They're helping Maduro kill his own citizens, including young children the same age as my grandchildren. But they do not represent the consensus of the world community. History has shown that in important moments, the world community has the ability to come together, to put our differences aside, and fight for the common good. And this must be one of those moments. Thank you for commitment.
Thank you. The floor now goes to Ms. Karapetyan from Armenia, and Ms. Amador from Portugal is next after. Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to start with thanking Rapporteur Hajiani for this very comprehensive and thought-provoking report and resolution. Human rights are very, very important for conflict transformation and conflict resolution, and it is only if we address the original violations of human rights that are at the root of conflicts and do it so in an inclusive manner, we can hope for sustainable peace to arrive through these peace processes and conflict resolution processes. I would like to stress that in this dimension, it's important that we pay attention, that there are no gray zones in the OSCE area, that international organizations have access to all conflict areas to make sure they have the necessary oversight over the observation of human rights in these conflict areas. We also welcome the special attention towards the protection of the rights of children in conflict areas. Armenia cooperates with the International Red Cross in applying measures in conflict-affected areas and making sure that there are safe rooms constructed and shelters constructed in conflict areas. I would like to invite my Azerbaijani colleagues to once again concentrate on using an inclusive language when we're talking about human rights in conflict areas. Yes, it is about the human rights of displaced populations. And how do we address the human rights of displaced populations? We make sure that as they are waiting for the political resolution of the conflict, they have normality in their lives, that they are integrated in the communities where they live. And at the same time, this inclusivity also applies to populations that live in the conflict areas right now. We need to make sure that their needs are attended and their concerns and hopes are heard by the international community as well. So once again, I would like to advocate for the presence of international structures, the OSCE, the UN in conflict areas, and in particular in the context of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And to end again with a positive note, I want to welcome very much the return of the Armenian citizen Zaven Karapetyan to Armenia. He had crossed the border into Azerbaijan, and he most recently was able to return to Armenia through the help of the International Red Cross. And similarly, a citizen of Azerbaijan, Elvin Ibrahimov, was able to return to his home country, and he had crossed the border into Armenia this spring, and he was able to return home. I want to welcome this and once again stress that we need to move forward in this direction rather than pulling ourselves back. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor now goes to Ms. Amador from Portugal, and Mr. Whittingdale, United Kingdom, is getting ready.
Madam Chair, dear colleagues, many thanks. I would like first to congratulate the rapporteur for the very completed and very rich resolution, as well the relevant report. And I would like to address 4 main areas that may stay in our agenda. At first, the women's rights promotion, that it's a condition for the quality of democracy, and our fight against women's violence. Women's violence is still a drama in our societies, in our countries, and we must put this issue in our agenda in order to avoid the daily deaths of women in all our countries. The second area that we must address is still the question of the defense of the child's abuse, sexual abuse, and also the problems that they live on the territories where there are armed conflicts. And our convention, the Rights of the Children Convention, must be respected on a daily basis, as well as they must be respected all the children's rights on this convention. A third area, the area of the asylum seekers, we have now noticed by the United Nations High Commissioner that more than 70 million of refugees and displaced persons are all over the world, and we must answer to these huge numbers with huge answers, and that must be in our agenda in order to respect the asylum seekers' rights, to respect the Geneva Convention and the principle of jus cogents the principle of non-refoulement, as also the principles that are inscribed concerning refugees on the Declaration of Human Rights and on the Convention of Human Rights, and also the 4 issues that the rapporteur approaches also, that is the abolition of death penalty. It's a cruel and human treatment that we cannot have in our OSCE countries, and we must fight against this death penalty that is still present in some of our OSCE countries. At last, a main issue also in the report, which is the education referred on paragraph 66, the importance of global education and education for human rights. Only at school we can change mentalities. Only at school we can build a culture of tolerance, of non-discrimination, and of peace, in order to avoid hate speeches, in order to avoid populism and xenophobia that we are seeing also in Europe. The respect for human rights begins always at school, and education is always the key for change. Our parliaments, national parliaments, must be involved and play an active role on this process. Measures such youth parliament programs as national strategies for education concerning equality and human rights are very important. Hearing the voice of students is a very important measure of OCDE that we must also reply.
Amador,
so for finish,
please.
all of these measures, because we may never know the results of our action, but if we do nothing, there will be no results. So it's still a very important way of acting, always in action.
Thank you. The floor now goes to Mr. Whittingdale from United Kingdom, and Ms. Bartus from Poland is getting ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too would like to speak in support of the references in the draft report to freedom of the media and protection of journalists. As has been pointed out, Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights specifically suggests that freedom of the media is a vital human right and a component of a free society. A functioning democracy requires that we have free and independent journalists who fulfill the role of exposing corruption, highlighting injustice, and holding governments to account. But too often, this can lead to imprisonment, to hostage-taking, and sometimes even death. Last year was one of the worst years on record for the deaths of journalists. 80 journalists died in the course of their duties. The worst case, or at least that which was achieved most attention, was that of Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul. But within the OSCE itself, we have already heard mention of the death of Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta, and there have been deaths in Slovakia and in Bulgaria. This year already, 17 journalists, 2 citizen journalists, and 1 media assistant have been killed. And I regret to say that one of those who died was in my own country of the United Kingdom, Lara McKee, who died while covering a demonstration in Northern Ireland. Today, Reporters Sans Frontières records that 178 journalists, 146 citizen journalists, and 17 media assistants are currently in prison. 34 of those are in Turkey, 25 in Egypt, 20 in Saudi Arabia. I very much welcome the release, very recently, of the investigative journalist Ivan Golunov in the Russian Federation. He was released due to overwhelming pressure from civil society, but there are at least 6 other journalists currently detained there. The UK has made freedom of media and protection of journalists an absolute priority. Our government has appointed Amal Clooney to be our envoy on media freedom, and next week the United Kingdom is hosting a conference for governments across the world to discuss what more we can do to strengthen media freedom and the protection of journalists. And I will be following that up later this year in my capacity as chair of the British group of the Interparliamentary Union, when we will be organising another conference for parliamentarians to address this very important issue. And I very much hope that countries represented here in Luxembourg will also come to London to discuss what more we can do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The floor now goes to Ms. Bartus from Poland, and Ms. Fry from Canada is getting ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, dear colleagues. Poland welcomes the call expressed in the resolution to place the promotion and protection of human rights at the center of the domestic and foreign policy agenda of the OSCE participating states. My country is committed to advancing human rights and democracy both nationally and internationally. Fundamental freedoms and the rights of those most vulnerable, in particular persons belonging to religious minorities, of children, remain the cornerstone of Polish human rights policy. An important part of the Polish human rights agenda is to promote democratic values and support countries in transition following our historical experience of a peaceful transformation. In this respect, I want to reiterate our rapporteur's opinion in paragraph 45 that intolerance, including anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or Christianophobia, presents a real threat to our societies. I wish to underline that we attach particular importance to the freedom of religion or belief. We intended to stress the pivotal importance of the continuous promotion and protection of children's rights. Poland's great attachment to the issue was reflected in its strong engagement in elaborating and adopting the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the first binding act of international law that formulated the full catalogue of child rights. Poland was among the first countries to ratify the convention. We also signed its optional protocols on the involvement of children in armed conflict and on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography. On this occasion, I would like to commend the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights based in Warsaw for their work in regard to raising awareness of hate crimes and other forms of discrimination, including based on religious grounds. Moreover, I know the critical importance of the participation of young people in the democratic processes and of their inclusion in public life as stated in paragraph 68. During the 2018 edition of the Warsaw Dialogue for Democracy, a yearly conference organized by the Polish MFA with the participation of numerous human rights defenders, we focused on new technologies, youth, and the influence of social media on democracies around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor goes to Ms. Fry from Canada. Is getting ready Mr. Komienko from Russian Federation.
Very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to say that I listened to everyone, and most people seem to think that this is an issue we should be seized with as parliamentarians. I first want to commend your committee and your rapporteur for bringing this really important report to our attention. Our world is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. This is a world in crisis. It's in crisis for very many reasons. But one of the most important things is that we all talk about the Holocaust. We remember Rwanda, we remember South Africa, we remember all of these horrible crimes, and they're all within our memory, and yet we continue to watch them happening again and again. We continue to see us making the same mistakes. We love to say, lest we forget. We love to say, we remember those things and we will never do them again. And yet we do them again and again. And I think it's really important for parliamentarians to protect our citizens, to be able to speak out. We have tools, legislative tools. We have this ability to stop xenophobia. We can put legislation that will end the sort of hate crime that is disseminated on digital media all of the time. And it's being disseminated so rapidly that everyone is being able to be aware within minutes of where hate is going on and being able to listen to and follow it. We must not only talk about what we ought to do. We cannot only nod our heads and say, yes, we all agree, and isn't this terrible? We need to remember that these are people. We're talking about human beings. We all belong to the same family of human beings. And if we, as parliamentarians, don't have the courage to stand up and do not have the courage to speak out on these issues, to make legislation, to stand up, sometimes we appease each other. We use diplomacy, which is very important. I agree, we need to talk. We need to always keep the doors open to talk. But we must also be strong and firm in the way we stand for the principles that we believe in. And I really, really believe that it is time, if we continue to remain silent, we have to consider that we're complicit in what is happening. And this is something I want to warn us all about. We cannot look back and say, wow, I wish I knew, I should have spoken up, I should have done something. We are in the right place, we are the leaders in our societies, and we need to stand up and do those things. And I remember firmly somebody that I want to quote, and it's Nelson Mandela, when he became president of South Africa. And people asked him why he didn't turn the tables on the whites who had so harshly treated and killed blacks in his country. And he said, why? Because I would be just like them. We need to end this. Somebody needs to have the courage to put an end to it and speak the truth about what is happening, but more importantly, to act. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to Mr. Komienko, I would like to communicate, dear colleagues, we have 9 speakers still on the list. I suggest that we still listen to 3 of them and then adjourn and take the 6 remaining speakers in our meeting of tomorrow. We now still have Mr. Komienko, Ms. Kauma, and from Finland, and Mr. Aydin from Turkey. Господин Komienko, у вас есть слово.
Уважаемая госпожа Кирен Ниле, уважаемые коллеги, проект вызывает серьезные возражения по форме и содержанию российской делегации. Он содержит набор претензий, не подкрепленных фактами, в частности, необоснованное обвинение в адрес России в нарушениях прав ЛГБТ-сообщества в Чеченской Республике. Совершенно неприемлемыми являются призывы осуществления со стороны государств-участников ОБСЕ мониторинга ситуации с соблюдением прав этой категории российских граждан, так как это является вмешательством во внутренние дела нашего государства. Более того, текст перенасыщен ссылками на страновые ситуации, включая необоснованные обвинения в адрес государств в нарушениях всевозможных категорий прав человека. Неоправданными представляются апелляции к странам ОБСЕ обеспечивать приоритет правочеловеческому измерению своей внутренней политики в ущерб национальной безопасности. Абсолютно нерелевантными представляется также упоминание геноцида армян в контексте устойчивого развития и безопасности, а также неуместно высокие оценки деятельности специальной мониторинговой миссии ОБСЕ на Украине. Сожалеем, что в докладе не нашло отражения дело украинского журналиста Кирилла Вышинского. На днях срок его содержания под стражей вновь продлен по надуманным причинам. Призываем коллег обратить на это внимание. В проекте резолюции, к сожалению, не отразил вступивший в силу на Украине закон об образовании и об обеспечении функционирования украинского языка как государственного, направленного на тотальную украинизацию всех сфер общественной жизни в этой стране. Ввиду предусмотренных в законе преференций для языков ЕС, русский язык подвергается двойной дискриминации по отношению к украинскому языку и по отношению к языкам стран ЕС. Для такой многонациональной страны, как Украина, подобные действия губительны и безответственны. Убеждены, что игнорирование интересов значительной части населения страны только усугубит раскол украинского общества и еще больше отдалит перспективы урегулирования внутриукраинского кризиса. В этой связи вызывает недоумение отсутствие четкой и однозначной реакции со стороны ОБСЕ на подобные откровенно дискриминационные законодательные инициативы Киева. Призываем коллег-парламентариев дать принципиальную оценку действиям украинских властей.
В целом российская делегация выступает против указанного проекта резолюции. Мы будем голосовать, естественно, тоже против. Благодарим за внимание.
Spasiba. The floor goes to Ms. Kauma from Finland and is getting ready Mr. Aydin from Turkey as our last speaker of today's meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Hadiani for his very extensive and important draft resolution. It covers a wide range of issues related to the human dimension aspect of the work of the OSCE. Just a reminder to us all, ensuring the respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms is not a job with an end. It requires our constant attention and our tireless efforts to maintain and improve the situation of all our people. I would like to highlight one particular aspect from the draft resolution in the paragraph number 25, child and forced marriages. No one should be forced to marry against their will. No reference to tradition, custom, or habit can justify this horrible crime. Still, this issue has been debated recently also in my country. I'm proud to say that the ban on child marriages entered into force in Finland on the 1st of June this year. From this day on, only persons aged 18 years or older may now be married. The basis for the ban was to safeguard the rights of children, and I think this is very important to remember. Forced marriages is also a serious issue that needs our attention. In Finland, forced marriages are dealt with by human trafficking legislation. However, still all forms of forced marriages as such have not been criminalized, although we are bound by the Istanbul Convention to do so. With the rising number of immigrants to Europe and also to Finland, also we will have to bring our legislation up to date. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair, this shows that also in a country with a strong reputation on respect for human rights, we still have a lot to do. I think we all need to move forward on this and end these crimes that are essentially crimes against humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor now goes to Mr. Aydin from Turkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear Madam Chair and colleagues, I would like to start thanking the rapporteur for his goodwill and effort he put on the preparation of this report. However, I would like him to change or remove some paragraphs, such as paragraph 16, simply for a couple of reasons, I reckon. Dear colleagues, initially this organization is mainly based on cooperation among the participating countries in order to build a strong stance of security. But unfortunately, instead of strengthening cooperation and security bonds among the participating states, we apparently, by adding such paragraphs, divert from this main pillar and start producing value judgments about a participating country with particular reference to historical events 100 years ago, and create a deep split among us. Secondly, those allegations concerning this specific issue, so-called the Armenian Genocide, have no factual, no historical, and no legal basis. Genocide is a very narrow legal concept and denotes a clearly defined crime, which can only be established by a competent court as defined in 1948 Genocide Convention. On the other hand, the European Court of Human Rights in 2015 and 2017 underlined that the events of 1915 constitute a legitimate subject of debate. Therefore, Turkey wholeheartedly requested all concerning sides to open their archives for research and invite the historians to debate and shed more light. But so far, no positive replies have been received yet. In this regard, I also would like to remind you Astana Declaration adopted in 2008 General Assembly, and item number 68. In this adopted item, it is noted that we should encourage the establishment of joint history commissions between participating states, composed of their historians and experts, introducing where necessary those of third countries to conduct research in the relevant historical, political, and military archives in order to shed objective and scientific light on these issues for mutual understanding and transparency. In the light of all these, the absence of competent court decision backing unfounded genocide claims, radical circles have resorted to politicize history by parliamentary decisions in some countries. If we go like this and start questioning the historical events, we stand up, instead of historians, then we can easily divert from our own mission, which is strengthening cooperation and security measures of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank you very much for your active participation. We will continue the debate on this draft resolution tomorrow at our next meeting at 11 o'clock in this same room. We have 6 more speakers for this debate, and thereafter we will move into the discussion and debate on the amendments. I wish you a good lunch and a very nice day here in Luxembourg. The meeting is adjourned.